An Egyptian doctor, his wife is an Egyptian doctor. Tawfiq Hamid is now one of the most effective people countering Islamist terrorist ideology. But he talks about his recruitment and his recruiter, Mukhtar, back in medical school. And here's what he says. Listen to this. On the way to the mosque, Mukhtar, his recruiter, emphasized the central importance in Islam of the concept of al-fikr kufr, the idea that the very act of thinking, fikr, makes one become an infidel, kufr, al-fikr kufr. He told me, quote, "Your brain is just like a donkey." Now remember, a donkey is an unclean animal. Your brain is like a donkey that can get you only to the palace door of the king. Who's the king? Allah. To enter the palace, once you have reached the door, you should leave your donkey, your inferior mind, outside. By this parable, Mukhtar meant that a truly dedicated Muslim no longer thinks but automatically obeys the teachings of Islam, unquote. What's significant here is, when you reach the palace door, you leave your donkey, your unclean mind, outside. Boethius, the great philosopher in the 6th century, before he was taken out and executed, wrote in the Consolation of Philosophy this beautiful, beautiful line. He said, "The soul is at its most free when it remains in contemplation of God's mind." The soul is at its most free when it remains in contemplation of God's mind. Within this dominant form of Sunni Islam that I have described to you, there is no connection between the mind of the creature and the mind of the Creator. And it is my position that this severance has created the most profound woes in the Muslim world. There is a great statement by the Holy Father, then I'll stop, Sabatini. I see you getting up back there. But this is so beautiful. He was stopped by a student in a street in Rome, and he said this: "There are only two options. Either one recognizes the priority of reason, of creative reason that is at the beginning of all things and is the principle of all things. The priority of reason is also the priority of freedom. Or one holds the priority of the irrational, inasmuch as everything that functions on our earth and in our lives would be only accidental, marginal, an irrational result. Reason would be a product of irrationality. One cannot ultimately prove, in quotes, either project, but the great option of Christianity is the option for rationality and for the priority of reason. This seems to me to be an excellent option, which shows us that behind everything is a great intelligence to which we can entrust ourselves." Unquote. The priority of reason, the priority of freedom, I hope you've seen that tonight. The great tragedy within Islam is that back in the first half of the 9th century, I could have read this statement, substituted Islam for Christianity, and it still would have read truly. My friends who are struggling within the Muslim world for an opening of the Muslim mind know this. They want to reopen these questions about who God is, what His relationship to reason is, so that they can reopen their minds. And someone once asked me, I think last week, have I ever tried to evangelize a Muslim? And I said, no, I'm still alive. But in whatever modest way can be offered in this book, it is meant as to open that palace door, and you get to ride into it with your donkey, your mind, to see Logos, who gave you your reason. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reilly. Thank you very much. We're going to take a short break.
What are your expectations for reform of the Muslim mind? Because your talk, it was excellent. I learned so much tonight and last night. For, among many things, very distressing implications for U.S. foreign policy.
That's an excellent question. Can everyone hear me, by the way? There was a outstanding Moroccan philosopher who just died a year and a half ago, al-Jabbar. He made the statement that the future of Islam will be Aristotelian or it will not be. In other words, they will have to recover the capacity to think critically or they will become extinct. There's one possibility of what we're witnessing, if we're thinking strategically, is the implosion of what remains of a civilization. And civilizations don't always die peacefully. But unless there is some kind of reform at the level at which al-Jabbar said, I don't see how it's getting worse. Their collision with modernity, with rationality, with modern science, it's getting worse, not better. The intellectual trends in the Islamic world are away from the reform school, not toward it. It's getting more dangerous for the Islamic reformers I know to work in their own countries. In fact, most of them have had to flee their own countries. And they're either here or in Europe or in Canada. So that looks very problematic. Now, do you mean to ask me about the Arab Spring and what's happening in Egypt and so forth today? This is an extraordinarily dangerous time. It, of course, gives rise to great hopes that these people have thrown off these autocratic, tyrannical regimes. But what is there to replace it? And there's one question to ask yourselves that I think will illuminate the landscape. How many people in Egypt do you suppose believe that all people were created equal? That means Muslims and Copts, men and women, to say nothing of Muslims and Jews. How many do you think? Zero? Well, that's a problem then, isn't it? Since that's the fundamental principle underlying democratic constitutional rule. And if that hasn't been absorbed into their culture, how can it sustain democracy? Otherwise, you'll just see a switch from one oppressor to another. And the great danger is that the best organized group in civil society in Egypt is the Muslim Brotherhood. I can tell you the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hassan al-Banna, kept al-Ghazali by his bedside. So that's the side of Islam they are on. They are the main Islamist organization in the world, and even al-Qaeda is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. So it's an extremely perilous, dangerous time for that reason.
What is the place of jurisprudence when you don't have free will? Wouldn't the woman with the dog in their house just say, well, God wills me to get out of the bathtub, or he doesn't?
I'm afraid you weren't listening to the